Hi everybody, this is Stephen Pugh. This is video number 4 of the City and Guilds course for Carpentry and Joinery. And today we're going to be looking at the subject of personal protective equipment and many other subjects following that. We're looking at the overall subject of health and safety at present. So personal protective equipment then is another Act of Parliament which was passed in 1992. And this is Personal Protective Equipment at Work Regulations. So then, this regulation states that that PPE is to be included in the method statement. So when somebody does a risk assessment, and alongside the risk assessment they do a method statement, so they need to include what PPE is going to be provided, and it will be part of the statement, the method statement. It must be properly assessed before it is used to ensure that the PPE is suitable, and it must be maintained correctly, and it must be stored in a suitable container. It must be then stored in use. When you put your hat away, when you put your goggles away, when you put your mask away, it needs to be in a proper container to keep it working correctly. It must be provided to employees with instructions on how it is to be used safely, and it must be used correctly by employees. Having a mask that doesn't fit correctly is not a mask at all. Having goggles that aren't adjusted correctly is not goggles at all. Having a high-vis vest but putting it on inside out, or putting it on in a way that looks silly, that is not the correct use. Having a hat that's put on back to front is not the correct use of the hat. So all of these things need to be considered. It must be kept in a good condition, and it must therefore be used correctly. In fact, most sites will have signs up, mandatory signs explaining what PPE must be used on that site. Now let's just go through some of the aspects of PPE just so that we all understand what we're talking about. This is personal protective equipment. First of all, we have the hard hat, or the safety helmet. Now the hard hat must be worn at all times on the site, and sometimes these hats come in various varieties. Sometimes they're just a plastic helmet, which is fine. Sometimes they look like a baseball cap, and sometimes they have other fitments, so that they might have, for example, earphones attached to them and so on. Whichever way, what they must not be is they mustn't be tampered with, they mustn't be painted, you mustn't put stickers on them. All these things can affect the viability of the helmet. If you accidentally drop your hat off a scaffold and it falls a couple of floors and hits a stone, then you need to consider whether you need to have a new hat. All these hard hats are time stamped, and you need to take a look at the time stamp periodically, and it'll tell you on that time stamp when it needs to be replaced. Now the next thing is that you need to wear steel toe cap boots or shoes. Now whether they're a full boot to come around your ankle or whether they're more like a shoe shape, doesn't really matter. The important thing is they need to be steel toe caps. They need to have a safety mark, a British Standard Institute mark. They need to be the right setting for you, the right size for you. You don't wear other people's boots, you wear your own boots, and you keep them safe, you keep them clean, and you'll wear them and they'll be fine. The next thing is ear defenders. Different sites demand different standards, but if your site is a typical site, then some good quality earphones are important. Now you don't need to be having earphones that are the little tiny things that pop in your ears, because they're actually going to muffle some sound. But what you ideally will need is something that goes over your ear, something that is able to be comfortably worn, something that isn't going to be an irritant, otherwise you'll just take them off. The next thing then is a high visibility vest. This is a vest that goes over the chest. Different colours, yellow perhaps for an operative, and orange or red if they're going to be a supervisor. They need to be worn at all times, because in low light, either early in the morning or in low light in the afternoon, or in fact if there's smoke on the site or some other mist, then it's important that any vehicle can see you there. The next one then is safety goggles or safety glasses. It's very important that people don't just pop on any glasses. They need to be properly certified safety glasses. They need to have a British Standard Institute mark, and they will have been tested and they will be thoroughly tested. When they come to you, they'll come perfectly clean, but they need to then be kept in a perfectly clean state. Traditionally, these safety goggles don't really last that long. They last about 3 months or 6 months, and then the surface, because it's plastic, tends to scratch and they become in the way of you seeing. So they need to be checked as well regularly. Dust masks and respirators. Now, there's various types of dust masks. There's some that go over the whole face. There's some that go over the face and they're just like a piece of paper. There's lots of different varieties. What we recommend is it's far better to have a better quality one than a worse quality one. So we recommend the ones that are plastic and which cover the face and have the respirator filters so that it filters out all dust. A lot of the dusts that are found on building sites, it could be just brick dust, it could be plaster dust, it could just be dirt on some dirty housing estates, or it could be fibres from timber. Those fibres are actually potentially quite dangerous, so very important that you keep the hazardous dusts out of your lungs. Now, the next thing then is gloves. There's lots of varieties of gloves. There's the stiff leather gloves, which if you're handling really rough stuff. There are the gauntlet gloves. These are the chemical proof gloves. There are the nitrolite gloves, which are the very small gloves that have a surface that's a bit thicker and then the back is breathable. And then you can have latex gloves. Now, all gloves are relatively uncomfortable and they do interfere with working. However, far better to have a glove on than have a nasty splinter. Far better to have gloves on than have nasty burns from something. And another thing that comes on is the question of PPE, is the question of sunscreen, protection from the sun. I have a mark on my face, just a small mark, and that was produced by working on a building site in the blazing sun over a number of days. It's not a melanoma, but it could be. To me, it's just the doctor said it's just a small bit of dried skin now that won't go away. But these melanomas, these cancer risks are really quite serious, and a good quality sunblock is really what's needed. That's very important, PPE. And then of course there's another problem that you can have, and that is HAVS, which is the hand-arm vibration syndrome, HAVS. And it's very important. There's a whole law associated with this particular issue. So it's recommended that people look at that issue as a thing standing alone. Let's look at the next issue on health and safety. It's working at height regulations, 2005 as amended. And there are at least 5 initial points we need to point out about working at height. First of all, working at height should be avoided if at all possible. Okay, so we don't really want people to be working at a height if it is at all possible to not do so. Let me give you an example of how that can be done. Very often on building sites now, they will build a complete roof structure and they will knit it together and build it, and then a crane will come along and lift it up and put it on the house. Now, they could have been actually scrambling around 3 or 4 floors up, putting the roof on. But that was an unnecessary hazard, so by creating it on the ground, if they slip, they're just going to fall a few feet onto the ground. And this is an example of where working at height can be completely avoided altogether. Now, if working at height cannot be avoided, then the work must be properly organised with all the risk assessments carried out, and the risk assessments need to be checked very regularly. Those working at height need to be trained and they need to be competent. You know, they need to be trained in their job, but they need to be confident and competent in what they're doing. And the method statement must obviously bear this in mind. Now, there are several points that need to be considered when working at height. The first is, how long is the job expected to take? If you're going to have to go up to a height and do something that lasts 5 minutes, that's very different than going up to a height and working for 2 hours. That's a different matter. And going up to a height and working all day. So the time span of the job is something to be borne in mind. The other question is, what type of work will it be? Could it be anything to do with lifting? Could it be anything to do with removing something from the building? Could it be installing something? So all these different processes have a different implications in terms of safety. Another question is, what are the risks to passers-by? I'll give you an example of this. I was working in Shropshire on a big building in another town, and there was a very large gable end. It was just a single structure made of 9-inch brickwork, but it went up to quite a height. It went up to something like about 35 feet. But that brick structure, to some degree, was relying upon the roof structure that was attached to it to brace it. When all of that roof structure was removed, it literally was standing there upright in the wind. Now you say, well, nothing much wrong with that, except that just next door was a doctor's surgery, and young women with babies and prams were walking right past the bottom of that structure. And there were times when the wind was really quite strong, and occasionally you could just see the thing move a tiny bit. If that had come down, there would have been a lot of serious questions. So you can understand, can't you, that it's about passers-by, not just about you, not just about the site. It sometimes is about other people. So the other question that comes in mind, which I mentioned just there, is what are the conditions like? I mean, is it presently in extreme weather? Is there very, very high gusty winds? Is the building unstable? Are there poor ground conditions that need to be taken into account? There's a lot of considerations when working at height. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is access equipment and safe methods of use. And the first thing we'll talk about is ladders. Now then, there's at least 4 points necessary about working with ladders. The first point is that the way in which the ladder is positioned on the ground needs to have some consideration. Just having some wood coming down and just resting on a surface is just probably not adequate. Most good quality ladders will have adjustable feet, so that whatever ground they're on, they will adjust themselves to the shape of the ground. This is very important. The other thing is that the frame itself needs to be of a good quality British standard. Ladders today are pretty well electricity proof. They are also exceptionally strong and exceptionally light. So all these things need to be borne in mind. If you're trying to erect a ladder that's very heavy, or if you're trying to erect a ladder near to some overhead power lines, then you need to start to think again about what you're doing. Okay, we don't rest ladders against guttering, especially plastic guttering. Plastic guttering has a habit of bending, moving. Okay, so if you put your ladder against it and start going up, you'll see sometimes the whole of the plastic guttering will move and flex. There are various specialized ladders. For example, there are roof ladders, or sometimes we call them crawling boards, and these roof ladders are specially designed to hook over the top of a roof, okay, and become something that won't slip. At the bottom of a ladder, it's possible to secure it to the ground. You can put some timbers down and the ladder sits in between, and that stops it from ever kicking away. If that isn't possible, then you just get your mate to stand at the bottom of the ladder and put his foot on it and hold it steady. At the top, it wouldn't be unwise to secure the ladder, rope it or attach it to the scaffolding that you're going up to. Okay, if ladders are going to extend right up to a scaffold, then they need to go at least a metre beyond the height of the floor, so that when you're getting onto the ladder or getting off the ladder, you've got something that you can hang on to so that you don't topple over. What you certainly don't want to be doing is finding that the ladder is just about at the top and you've got to try and scramble onto it, and you've got to try and scramble back onto the ladder. That's a highly dangerous thing to do. A couple of other things. Certain types of ladders are specifically designed so that they don't have the top few steps, and those are the best ones to buy. And you'll see little step ladders where someone has to just go and put a light bulb in. Well, the top of the ladder can have quite a large area with no rungs. Nobody is expected to go any higher than that, and then the top of the ladder then becomes the handle upon which you hold yourself steady. When you're on a ladder or when you're on a step ladder, you do not overreach. You do not put your hand on here and reach very, very far to try and do an operation. No, that's very poor. You certainly don't lift up one of your feet to reach, and you don't take your both hands off the ladder. These are all obvious things, but you know, people do these things. You don't carry tools up and down a ladder unless they're very small and light. And then also, you make sure that when you're using a ladder, that it is very secure, that all of the aspects of the step ladder or the ladder are working correctly. So we've mentioned an awful lot about step ladders. We will just pass off on that. A lot of people, and it's very traditional in the past, to be using what's called trestles. These are steel trestles designed solely for the purpose of making some sort of a platform at about, say, 1 metre high, and it's boarded out and guardrails all around it. These aren't as common as they used to be. Nowadays we seem to have lots of little working platforms that are small, which have wheels, so that you can just wheel it through a doorway, open it up, put a platform on it, and then you can get onto it to work. These small platforms, they're so convenient, but they actually can be potentially dangerous. So many people can slip and fall from these things. Now, the next type of access equipment is what we call a tower scaffold. Now, a tower scaffold is a scaffold made out of segments of iron, segments of steel, and they come in a piece and they're all fitted together, and it's a little bit like doing a large Jenga. But let me mention a few points about this, 7 points. First of all, always read and follow the manufacturer's instruction manual. Now, often a lot of these tower scaffolds don't come with any instructions that you're aware of, so you know you really need to think twice about using a tower scaffold. First of all, only use the equipment for what it's designed for. Okay, think about that scaffold. That scaffold is only designed to be used in the way that the manufacturer recommended or designed it for. The wheels or the feet of the tower must be in contact with a firm surface all the time. Very often, you know, people erect one and they move it into place, and then when they get on it, they find that some of the feet sink. And if they sink very far, more than 5 or 6 inches, it's going to tipple right over. Okay, so think about making sure that all of the feet are secured under a firm surface. Now, outriggers should be used to increase the stability. Now, an outrigger is a large, if this is the scaffold here, it's a large piece of the scaffold that sticks out and braces it, stops it from tipping over. And you can have outriggers on all of the different sides of the scaffold, and that makes it far, far safer than normal. The other thing is to not overload the scaffold. If you're working with a bricklayer or if you're working with certain trades, you don't want to be putting lots of weight on the top of the scaffold. The more weight you put on the top, the more likelihood there is that it will tip. Okay. Another point is that the platform should not be unloaded and reduced in height. The platform should be unloaded and reduced in height if it's going to be moved at all. So if you've got stuff on the top of the scaffold waiting, you wouldn't want to move it hardly at all while there's weight on the top. Obviously, when you're moving a scaffold, if there's weight on the top, the tendency to the tip is very great. That needs to be studiously avoided. So the other thing is, never climb up the outside of scaffolding. It's not designed for that. It's designed to just stand. Normally speaking, in the middle of scaffolding, there's a way whereby you can go up, and you'll notice that some of the working surfaces have a little trapdoor where you can go up the middle, flick the trapdoor open, come up onto the top, and then put it back down again. Now that's very, very important. You don't climb up the outside. This isn't a climbing frame. This isn't an SAS survival course. This is something that's serious, and it's on the building site, and it's for your use. So then, wow, that's a lot to remember. I'm sure that, if you want to stop this video at any time and go back and listen to anything again, then just do that, use it for that purpose. I want to talk now briefly about tubular scaffold. This is what we would call the traditional scaffolding that's used on buildings. And there's two different types. The first one is called independent scaffolding. This is where the scaffolding has a standard next to the building, and it has a standard, usually 1 meter across, and then there are transoms going across, binding the two together. Okay, now that's an independent scaffolding. The reason why we call it independent is because it's independent of the building. It's not attached to the building necessarily. It's very strong, super strong, very steady. They are always constructed by specialist scaffolding companies. Only trained and competent scaffolding erectors should be allowed to alter anything on scaffolding. I don't know whether you're aware, but the different heights of scaffolding require different types of permission and different types of permits. And so therefore, it's very important that people who are not scaffolders don't touch them. We don't take any parts out of it or anything. I was on a building site many years ago doing a health and safety check, and I spoke to the site foreman. I said, are you the scaffolding inspector? He said, yeah, I do the scaffolding inspectors. I said, oh, that's good. I said, can I have a look at your inspections? He said, yeah, certainly. And he opened the file, and it was blank. There'd never been any scaffolding inspections. And I said, I thought that would be the case, And he said, why is that? I said, because if you look out the window there, you'll see a scaffolding. He said, yes. I said, you notice at the left-hand side, there's no guardrails? And he went, oh, someone's taken them out. I said, yes. I said, you'll notice there's no foot protection, no toe guards. Oh, right. I said, and you'll also notice there's no side brace. Oh, right. I said, somebody could walk straight off that scaffolding and fall down 2 floors and hurt themselves or even kill themselves. And you haven't even got an inspection to say that you ever gave anybody permission to put it up. So therefore, you need to start thinking about this. This is what you would call a RID, or this is a dangerous practice. Nobody's got hurt yet, but that doesn't mean to say that no one's ever going to get hurt in the future. So we've got independent tubular scaffold, but there's also another type, and that's called putlog tubular scaffolding. And a putlog is the transom. It's the transom that goes sideways from the standard across towards the building. And instead of having another standard here like you do on independent, this one's missing, and the putlog goes straight through the building and is attached at the back or is attached at the front. But the important thing is it's got one standard, a putlog, straight into the building, and that is what you would call a putlog tubular scaffold. It goes without saying that all of this is done by the professionals. Now there's a few attachments associated with scaffolding which just need to be borne in mind. The first thing is, a lot of sites, if they're taking a lot of debris from the very top of the site and taking it all the way down into a skip, they will use a debris chute. This looks like a series of bins attached to one another, and when you put debris in the top, it comes down and goes straight into the skip. These are exceptionally useful devices, and what it does, it prevents people from having to tip stuff off into mid-air and hope it lands in the skip. That's obviously a very dangerous practice. We need to be very careful when we look at any tubular scaffolding that there is a proper toe board. Now a toe board is a vertical scaffold board that prevents things being accidentally kicked over the edge of the scaffold to fall in free fall down where it could hit somebody on the head who's walking by. There need to be proper guardrails, and these come up to a normal height, but there should be at least 2 of them, so that when anybody moves sideways, they don't fall straight off the back of the scaffolding. And there's other things as well. There's there's brick rails which prevent a pile of bricks from just toppling. You know, somebody could walk by, knock a brick, and it would cause the whole thing to fall down underneath. So let me just list 3 things that are very important when you're looking at scaffolding. The first thing is there must not be any gaps in the handrail or in the toe boards. There mustn't, of course, be any gaps in the scaffold boards underneath your feet. Okay, there mustn't be any gaps there. You must have a safe system for lifting materials to the working height. There's all sorts of ways in which this is done. It's become common nowadays for a site to have sometimes it's a digger or sometimes it's a forklift truck that will lift stuff up right to the height of the scaffolding, and there's special devices on the scaffolding that flip out of the way so they're able to feed onto the scaffolding, brickwork and so on. And the same can be used for timber. Timber has the same safety feature as that. And there must be a safe system of debris removal. So not only must it be safe to put things onto the scaffold, but there must be a safe way to get things off the scaffold into the skip. Now then, just a couple more things. There must be on buildings at least over 2 meters, but it may be even at the 2 meter level. There must be harnesses or lanyards which prevent people from falling straight to the ground. So a harness, okay, that has a lanyard that goes around the tummy, comes off the tummy, or sometimes it's on the back. And what happens if you slip? You'll fall, yes, but you won't fall all the way to the bottom of the floor. You will fall so far and then it will stop. Okay, you'll have to be rescued, you'll have to be got down, but at least you didn't actually hit the deck. There needs to be underneath, if you're a carpenter and you're working on the first floor joists, there needs to be netting just underneath. It's amazing how many people, falls are a really serious thing on building sites. And so netting underneath where you're working is very common indeed. Okay, that's something that needs to be done. And lastly, airbags. Now, you know, what they call it the bouncy castle, but it's just a large, or a series of large inflatable devices, so that if you do fall, you land in the airbag and you have a cushioned fall. Now, these airbags are not for playing with. They're not a means of getting off the site, nor are the safety netting. They're all devices to save your life. They're not for play. Okay, so there we are. So that concludes this video. We look forward to speaking to you on the next one. So have a great day. Bye for now.